Something was off from the start. There are a few moments I still think about. Usually late at night when everything is quiet enough that my mind starts filling in the gaps I never got answers to. None of them felt dangerous at the time. That's probably the part that bothers me the most. If anything, they felt slightly off, easy to ignore, easy to explain away while they were happening. It's only afterward that they started to feel wrong. Like the passenger I picked up one night who never said a single word to me. Not when he got in, not during the drive, not even when I asked him twice to confirm the destination. I remember thinking maybe he was drunk or tired or just rude. People get like that sometimes. But when I dropped him off, I didn't actually see him leave. I just heard the door open, then close. And when I checked the rearview mirror, the seat was already empty. Or the place I stayed at during a short trip out of town. It was supposed to be a quiet guest house, nothing unusual. The owner had left instructions for me to let myself in. Everything looked normal at first. Clean. Organized. But there was a door at the end of the hallway that was already slightly open when I got there. I remember thinking I must have misread the message that maybe it wasn't meant to be locked after all. Still, I was sure it had been closed when I first walked past it. And then there was the house on that street I used to walk through at night. The one with the for sale sign that had been there for weeks. No lights, no cars, nothing to suggest anyone was inside. But one evening, as I passed by, I noticed something behind the window. Just a shape at first. Then a person, standing completely still, facing out, watching. I didn't stop to look. At the time, I told myself there were explanations for all of it. There always are. But the more I think about those moments now, the harder it is to convince myself of that. Because in each of them, there was this quiet feeling I couldn't shake. Like something had already gone wrong, and I just didn't realize it yet. Story one setup, just another night driving. At the time, I was doing rideshare driving almost every night. It wasn't something I'd planned on doing long term, but it worked. The hours were flexible, the money was decent if you stayed out late enough, and for the most part, it was predictable. Nights had a rhythm to them. You'd get the usual mix of people, someone heading home from work, groups leaving bars, the occasional quiet passenger who just wanted to get from one place to another without saying much. I actually preferred the quieter rides. There's something about driving at night that feels calmer. The roads are mostly empty, the city feels slower, and conversations, if they happen at all, tend to be softer. After a while, you get used to it. You stop thinking too much about who's getting in your car and just focus on the drive. That night started the same way. Nothing unusual. A few short trips around the city, one longer ride out toward the suburbs, then back again. I remember checking the time at one point. It was getting later than I usually stayed out, but not by much. I figured I'd take one or two more rides before heading home. That's when the request came in. At first, I almost ignored it. The pickup location was a bit out of the way, just past the edge of where I normally drove. Not completely remote, but far enough that it wouldn't usually bother unless the fare looked worth it. I zoomed in on the map for a second, trying to get a better sense of where exactly it was. There wasn't much there. Just a stretch of road with a few scattered properties, spaced out more than usual. No obvious landmarks, no businesses, nothing that stood out. It looked quiet. Too quiet, maybe, for that time of night. I checked the rider details next. There wasn't much to go on. No profile picture, no name, just a single letter. I don't remember exactly what it was now, but I remember noticing it felt incomplete. Most people at least had something initial with the last name, a photo, anything to make it feel like a real person requesting the ride. This didn't. For a second, I considered declining it. Not because it felt dangerous or anything like that. Just inconvenient. Out of the way. A little too far for what was probably going to be a short trip. But then I looked at the time again, and the fact that I hadn't had a request in a few minutes. It happens sometimes. The night slows down, and you end up waiting longer between rides. So I told myself it was fine. Probably just someone heading home, maybe a late shift worker or someone visiting out there. People live in all kinds of places. There was nothing actually strange about it. I accepted the ride. The app calculated the route and gave me an estimated arrival time, about 12 minutes. As I started driving, I noticed how quickly the city faded behind me. Streetlights became less frequent. Traffic disappeared almost entirely. Even the usual background noise, the distant hum of other cars, the occasional siren seemed to drop off the farther I went. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, just different. I kept checking the map, making sure I hadn't missed a turn. The route was straightforward, but something about the area made me second guess it. Like I'd somehow gone farther than I was supposed to. After a few more minutes, I realized I hadn't seen another car in a while. Not passing by, not behind me, nothing. It was just the road ahead and the glow of my headlights stretching out into the dark. I remember adjusting in my seat, glancing at the rider information again, like I might have missed something the first time. Still just that single letter. No updates, no messages, no indication of who I was picking up or why they were out there at that hour. I told myself it didn't matter. A ride was a ride. But as I got closer to the pickup point, I couldn't shake this quiet feeling in the back of my mind. Not fear. Just the sense that I was heading somewhere I didn't fully understand. And by the time the app told me I had arrived, there was no one there. The passenger who didn't react. I remember slowing the car to a stop and looking around, expecting someone to step out from one of the nearby properties. But there wasn't much to look at. The road stretched in both directions, empty and quiet. On one side, there was a long fence running along what looked like an overgrown lot. On the other, a house set far back from the road, barely visible through the trees. No lights, no movement. I checked the app again to make sure I hadn't missed the exact pickup point. No, this was it. I waited a few seconds, then a full minute. Usually, by that point, someone would at least send a message or call, asking where I was. But nothing came through. The app still showed the ride as active, like the passenger was already on their way. I leaned forward slightly, scanning the area again, trying to see if maybe someone was walking up from the side of the road. That's when the back door opened. It wasn't sudden or loud, just a quiet shift. The handle moving, the door easing open like someone had already been standing right there, just outside my line of sight. I hadn't seen anyone approach. I turned slightly in my seat, more out of habit than anything, expecting to catch a glimpse of them as they got in. But I didn't. I just heard the door close behind me, soft and deliberate. For a second, I waited for the usual confirmation. People usually say something when they get in. A greeting, their name, their destination, something. There's nothing. I cleared my throat lightly. Hey, how's it going? No response. I glanced up at the rearview mirror, trying to get a look at them. It was hard to see clearly in the dark. Just a shape in the back seat, sitting slightly off center. I couldn't make out any details. No face, no expression. I figured maybe they hadn't heard me. Just wanted to confirm the name. I asked, keeping my voice casual. Still nothing. That was the first moment it started to feel a little strange. Not enough to worry me. Some people just don't feel like talking. I've had plenty of silent rides before. But even then, there's usually some kind of acknowledgement. A nod. A quick, yeah, something to confirm they're in the right car. This felt different. I tapped the screen to start the ride. The destination loaded, and I pulled away from the side of the road. For the first few minutes, it was just quiet. No music, no conversation, just the low hum of the engine and the sound of tires against the pavement. I kept my eyes on the road, but every so often, I'd glance up at the mirror again. Each time, it felt like I wasn't quite seeing them the way I should have. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing clearly wrong. Just slightly off. Like my eyes couldn't fully settle on their reflection. At one point, I thought maybe it was just the angle or the way the light from the dashboard was hitting the mirror. I adjusted it slightly, trying to get a clearer view. It didn't help much. The shape was still there, still sitting in the same position, but the details never seemed to come into focus. I told myself it was nothing, just bad lighting. It happens. A few minutes later, the GPS instructed me to take a right turn. As I slowed down to make it, I heard a voice from the back seat. Not here. It was quiet, flat, almost like the words had been delayed somehow. Like they'd been decided on a few seconds earlier and only just spoken. I hesitated for a second, then straightened the wheel and continued forward. Oh, okay, I said, glancing at the screen. Do you want to go another way? There was a pause, longer than it should have been. Then, keep going. Same tone. Same lack of urgency. I nodded even though they couldn't see me, and kept driving. The route adjusted automatically, finding another way to the destination. But a few minutes later, it happened again. Another turn came up, and just as I was about to take it. Not here. This time, I felt a slight shift in my chest. Not fear exactly, just confusion. I glanced at the mirror again. The passenger hadn't moved. Still sitting in the same position. Still facing forward, as far as I could tell. All right, I said, trying to keep things normal. Do you have a specific route you want me to take? Silence. Then, after a pause, I'll tell you. Something about that didn't sit right with me. Most people who give directions do it clearly. They tell you ahead of time, or they follow the GPS unless there's a reason not to. This felt reactive, like they were waiting until the last second to correct me. I kept trying. The road felt longer now, like the distance between turns had stretched out. The darkness outside seemed deeper somehow, the gaps between streetlights more noticeable. I tried to focus on the drive, but my attention kept drifting back to the mirror. Each time I looked, I had the same feeling. Like I wasn't quite seeing what was actually there. At one point, I thought I saw a slight movement, like their head had tilted just a fraction. But when I looked again, everything was still. Left up here, the voice said suddenly. I almost missed it. The turn was coming up fast, and I had to slow down quickly to make it. Got it, I said, a little more alert now. As I turned, I noticed something else. The passenger hadn't looked out the window, hadn't checked the street signs, hadn't done anything to indicate they were navigating visually. They just knew every time. And the more I thought about that, the more it started to bother me. Because if they weren't looking, then how were they deciding where to go? I tightened my grip on the steering wheel slightly, trying to shake the thought. It didn't make sense to dwell on it. There were plenty of explanations. Maybe they knew the area really well. Maybe they were just used to giving directions like that. Still, as I glanced at the mirror again, I noticed something I hadn't before. The way the light from the dashboard reflected back it didn't quite match the shape I was seeing. It was subtle, easy to miss, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. The reflection felt delayed, just slightly. Like it wasn't perfectly in sync with the car or the movement around it. I blinked, looked back at the road, then checked again. It was the same. Not wrong enough to be obvious, but not right either. And for the first time since they got in, I felt something shift in my chest. A quiet, steady discomfort. Because up until that point, everything had been explainable. But now, I wasn't so sure anymore. Climax and aftermath, there was no record. We drove like that for a while longer. Same pattern. Long stretches of silence, then a direction given just a little too late to feel normal. I stopped trying to make conversation after the second or third time they didn't respond. It felt pointless. Whatever was sitting behind me didn't seem interested in talking, or even acknowledging that I was there. At some point, I stopped checking the mirror as often. Not because I wasn't curious anymore, but because every time I looked, that same strange feeling came back. Like I wasn't quite seeing what I should have been seeing. It made it harder to focus on the road. So I just drove, waited for the next instruction. It came sooner than I expected. Pull over. The voice was the same flat, quiet, almost detached. But this time there was something different about it. Not urgency, exactly. Just final. I glanced at the map. We weren't near the destination. Not even close. There's not really a stop here, I said, slowing down anyway. Do you want me to... here? It cut me off. I didn't argue. There was a small stretch of gravel just off the side of the road, barely visible until you were right next to it. No buildings nearby, no lights, just empty land, fading into darkness. I pulled over. The car came to a stop, engine idling softly. For a second, nothing happened. I waited for them to say something else. Maybe clarify, maybe give a reason. Instead, I heard the seat shift slightly behind me. Then the door opened. Again. It was quiet. controlled. No sudden movements, no hesitation. I kept my eyes forward at first, not sure why. Maybe I expected them to say something before getting out. A quick thanks or this is fine. But there was nothing. Just the sound of the door, then silence. After a second, I turned my head, looking over my shoulder. The door was still open. The back seat looked empty. I blinked, trying to adjust to the darkness outside. For a moment, I thought maybe they were just out of view, standing just beyond the edge of the car. But I couldn't see any movement. No footsteps, no figure walking away. Just the open door and the dark beyond it. A strange, heavy feeling settled in my chest. I leaned slightly to get a better angle, hoping to catch even a glimpse of them moving away. There was nothing. I reached back and pulled the door closed. It clicked into place with a dull, final sound. For a few seconds, I just sat there. The engine humming, the road still empty, the air inside the car feeling different somehow, like something had shifted the moment the door opened. I looked at the mirror again. The back seat was completely empty now. No shape, no outline. Nothing that felt even slightly off. Just normal. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, then shifted the car back into drive. As I pulled away, I checked the app automatically, expecting to see the ride complete or at least in the process of ending. But the screen looked wrong. The trip wasn't there. At first, I thought maybe it just hadn't updated yet. Sometimes there's a delay, especially if the signal is weak. I refreshed it once, then again. Still nothing. No active ride. No recent trip. No record of the pickup, the route, or the drop-off. It was like it had never happened. I slowed down slightly, glancing between the road and the screen. That didn't make sense. Even canceled rides usually show up somewhere in the history. There's always some kind of trace. A timestamp. A partial record, anything. This was just gone. I pulled over again a few minutes later, parked under a streetlight this time, and opened the app fully, checking every section I could think of. Trip history, earnings, notifications, nothing. I even checked my messages. In case the passenger had tried to contact me through the app. Empty. The longer I looked, the more a quiet sense of unease started to build. Not panic. Just confusion turning into something heavier. I ended up contacting support. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. Gave them the time, the location, everything I remembered. I expected them to at least find something on their end. Instead, they told me there was no record of any ride request matching that description. No pickup at that location. No passenger with that initial. Nothing. I read the message a few times, trying to make sense of it. It didn't feel like a glitch. It felt like they were describing something that had never existed in the first place. I didn't drive much after that. I told myself it was just a technical issue, some kind of error with the system. Those things happen. They have to. But the feeling didn't go away. A few nights later, I found myself driving in that direction again. I didn't plan it. The route just happened to take me close to where I'd picked them up. As I passed the area, I slowed down slightly, looking for the spot. It took me a second to recognize it. The fence was still there. The road was the same. But the property behind it. It didn't look like somewhere anyone would be waiting for a ride. The house I thought I'd seen before was barely standing. Windows boarded up. Parts of the structure collapsed inward. The whole place looked abandoned, like it had been that way for years. There were no lights, no signs of life. No indication that anyone had been there that night. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. But ever since then, there's been this small habit I can't seem to shake. Every time someone gets out of my car late at night, I check the back seat just to make sure it's actually empty. Transition. It wasn't the only time. For a while, I told myself that was just one of those things you eventually forget. A glitch. A weird night. Something that didn't quite line up, but also didn't leave anything concrete behind. The kind of story that sounds strange when you say it out loud, but easy enough to dismiss if you don't think about it too much. And honestly, that's what I tried to do. Because things happen when you're out late enough. You see people at their worst, their strangest. You end up in places you wouldn't normally go. It's part of it. You learn not to question everything. But the truth is, that wasn't the part that stayed with me. It was the feeling. That quiet sense that something about it hadn't been right from the beginning, even if I couldn't explain why. And as unsettling as that was, at least I wasn't alone in it. There was someone else there, someone I could point to, even if I didn't understand them. The next time something like that happened, I didn't have that. Story 2 setup. A quiet place to stay. This happened a few months after the driving incident. I was traveling for a couple of days, nothing major, just a short trip to get out of the city for a bit. I didn't plan much in advance, which meant I ended up booking a place to stay at the last minute. The listing looked fine, actually better than fine. It had a lot of positive reviews, all saying the same things: quiet, peaceful, perfect if you want to be alone. The photos showed a small house surrounded by open land, a little isolated, but still accessible. It seemed like exactly what I needed. I booked it without thinking too much about it. The instructions came through almost immediately after. The host explained that they wouldn't be there to greet me, but everything would be set up. There was a key in a lockbox by the front door, and I could let myself in whenever I arrived. It sounded straightforward. By the time I got there, it was already getting dark. The drive out felt longer than probably was. The roads narrowed as I got closer, the streetlights becoming less frequent until they disappeared entirely. I remember checking the GPS more than once, just to make sure I hadn't missed a turn. Eventually, the house came into view. It looked just like the pictures. Small, single story, with a gravel driveway and a wide stretch of land surrounding it. No neighboring houses close enough to see clearly. Just open space and a line of trees in the distance. I pulled in and parked near the front. For a moment, I just sat there, looking at it. There was nothing wrong with it. No broken windows, no signs of neglect. The place looked well maintained, like someone took care of it regularly, but there was something about it that felt distant, like it existed slightly apart from everything else. I grabbed my bag and stepped out of the car. The air was still, completely still. No wind, no insects, no distant sounds. Just silence in a way that felt heavier than usual. I stood there for a second, letting my ears adjust, expecting to pick up on something, anything. But there was nothing. I walked up to the front door and found the lockbox exactly where the instructions said it would be. The code worked, the key slid out easily, and within a few seconds I was inside. The first thing I noticed was how clean everything was. Not just tidy, but almost untouched. The furniture was arranged neatly, the surfaces spotless. It looked more like a staged space than somewhere people actually stayed. I set my bag down near the entrance and took a few steps further in. The living room opened into a small kitchen area, and beyond that, a hallway leading to the bedrooms. Everything was lit softly, just enough to see clearly without it feeling too bright. I remember thinking it was nice, quiet, simple, exactly what I expected. But as I moved through the space, that same feeling started to creep in, subtle, easy to ignore. Like I wasn't entirely alone. I told myself it was just the silence. When you're used to constant background noise, traffic, people, something, it's strange to suddenly be somewhere with none of that. Your mind fills in the gaps. It makes you more aware of small details. That's all it was. I walked down the hallway, checking the rooms one by one. The bedroom I was supposed to use was at the end. It was set up the same way as everything else, clean, organized, almost too perfect. Fresh sheets, neatly folded towels, nothing out of place. Across from it, there was another door. This one was closed. I remembered the instructions mentioning something about it. I pulled out my phone and checked the message again. Please note, one room will remain locked during your stay. No need to access it. That was it. No explanation, no extra detail. I looked at the door for a second longer than I probably needed to. There was nothing unusual about it. Just a standard interior door, same as the others. No marks, no signs that it had been used recently or not. Still, I found myself listening, waiting, without really knowing what I was waiting for. There was no sound. I exhaled quietly and stepped back, shaking off the thought. It didn't matter. People lock rooms in rental places all the time. Storage, personal belongings, anything. I went back to the bedroom and set my things down. As I moved around, unpacking a few items, I noticed something else. The silence hadn't changed. It wasn't just quiet, it was complete. No creaks in the floor, no shifting in the walls. None of the small natural sounds you expect in a house. It was like everything had settled into place and stayed there. I paused for a moment, listening again. And for a split second, I had the distinct feeling that if I turned around too quickly, I might see something I wasn't supposed to. I didn't. I just stood there, letting the moment pass, then went back to what I was doing, telling myself again that there was nothing to worry about. Small things that didn't add up. At first, nothing really happened. I settled in, unpacked a few things, and tried to relax. I even remember thinking that I was overreacting earlier, that the place only felt strange because it was unfamiliar. Once I got used to it, everything would feel normal. So I kept myself busy. I made something simple to eat, walked around the property a little while there was still some light left, just to get a sense of the area. There wasn't much to see. Open land, the same line of trees in the distance, and a narrow road that curved out of sight. No other houses close enough to hear or see anything. It was quiet in a way that felt almost intentional. When I went back inside, that's when I noticed the first thing. It was small. The chair near the kitchen table had been slightly pulled out, not by much. Just enough that I stopped when I saw it. I stood there for a second, trying to remember if I had moved it earlier. I must have, I told myself. Maybe when I set my bag down or walked past it. It wasn't something I paid attention to at the time. It would have been easy to forget. Still, I stepped over and pushed it back in, lining it up with the table the way it had been in the listing photos. Then I went about the rest of my evening. A little later, I stepped outside again, just briefly. I think I was checking something in the car, or maybe just getting some air. I don't remember exactly. What I do remember is when I came back in, the kitchen light was on. I stopped in the doorway, hand still on the handle. I was almost certain I had turned it off. Not completely certain, but enough that it felt strange seeing it on again. I walked over slowly, looking around as I did, like I expected something else to be different too. Everything else looked the same. The chair was still pushed in. The counter was clear, nothing out of place, just the light. I reached up and turned it off again, standing there for a moment afterward, listening. There was still no sound, no movement, no indication that anyone or anything had been there. I told myself I probably just forgot. It happens. You do something without thinking, then convince yourself you didn't, especially in a new place where you're not fully settled yet. That explanation made sense, so I accepted it for a while. As it got later, I moved into the bedroom and tried to wind down. I put my phone on the nightstand, turned off the main light, and left the lamp on for a bit. That's when I heard it, a faint sound. So quiet I almost didn't register it at first. It came from somewhere down the hallway. I held still, listening. It didn't repeat immediately. Just a single soft noise, like something shifting slightly, or maybe a floorboard settling. I sat up a little, focusing on the direction it came from, the locked door. I stayed like that for a few seconds, waiting, nothing. The silence returned just as completely as before. I let out a slow breath and leaned back again. Houses make noises, especially older ones. Temperature changes, the structure settling, all of that. It didn't mean anything. Still, I found myself listening more carefully after that. Every small sound felt amplified. A few minutes passed, maybe more. Then I heard something again. This time it was even softer. Not a creak exactly, more like a faint movement. I couldn't tell if it was coming from inside the locked room or just somewhere in the house. It was too subtle to place. I sat there staring at the doorway of my bedroom, half expecting something to appear. Nothing did. I reached for my phone and checked the messages from the host again. Still no response. I had sent a quick message earlier just asking a general question about the place. Nothing urgent. But now, seeing that there was no reply, it added to the feeling. I considered sending another one, something more specific, asking about the noises, about the locked door. But I hesitated. It felt unnecessary, like I'd be overreacting. Instead, I got up and stepped into the hallway. The air felt cooler out there. I walked slowly toward the door, my footsteps sounding louder than they should have in the silence. When I reached it, I stopped. It looked exactly the same as before. Closed. Still, no handle movement, no light underneath, nothing to suggest anything had changed. I stood there for a long moment, just looking at it. Part of me wanted to open it, just to check, to confirm that there was nothing inside, that everything was exactly how it was supposed to be. It would have taken a second, just turn the handle, look inside, and be done with it. But then I remembered the message. Please note, one room will remain locked during your stay. There was something about that phrasing that stuck with me. Not should remain locked, would remain. Like it wasn't meant to be questioned. I exhaled slowly and stepped back. It wasn't my place to open it. There was no real reason to. I turned and went back to my room. But the thought stayed with me. The idea that something might be on the other side of that door. Something I almost saw. Something I chose not to. Later, as I lay in bed, I considered leaving. Just packing up and going somewhere else for the night. It crossed my mind more than once, but every time I found a reason not to. It was late. There weren't many places nearby. And nothing had actually happened. Not really, just small things. Things that could be explained. I turned off the lamp and lay back, staring up at the ceiling, telling myself I was just tired, that my mind was filling in gaps that weren't really there. Eventually I closed my eyes. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that house was just slightly out of place. The door was already open. I don't remember falling asleep. I remember lying there, listening to the quiet, trying to convince myself that everything I'd noticed was normal. That if I just ignored it, it would fade into the background like any other unfamiliar place. At some point, I must have drifted off. Because the next thing I remember is waking up. Not suddenly, not with a jolt. Just aware. Like something had shifted. The room was dark. The lamp I'd turned off earlier left only a faint outline of the furniture, barely visible in the shadows. For a few seconds I just lay there, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. There was no sound, no movement, just that same silence. But it felt different now, heavier. I turned slightly, looking toward the bedroom doorway. The hallway beyond it was darker than before, like the light I'd left on earlier was gone. That's when I noticed it. The door across the hall, the one that had been closed before. It wasn't closed anymore. It was slightly open. Just enough that I could see a thin line of darkness cutting into the frame. I stared at it for a long moment, not fully processing what I was seeing. I was sure it had been shut. I had stood right in front of it earlier. I would have noticed if it was open then. I pushed myself up slowly, sitting on the edge of the bed. For a second, I considered the possibility that I had imagined it, that maybe it had always been slightly open, and I just hadn't paid enough attention. But that didn't feel right. I knew what I saw. I stood up. My movements felt careful, quieter than they needed to be. Like I was trying not to disturb something, even though I couldn't say what. Step by step, I moved into the hallway. The air felt colder out there than it had earlier. The open door was still in the same position, not moving, not shifting, just open enough to notice. I stopped a few feet away from it. Up close, it didn't look forced or broken. There was no damage, no sign that the lock had been tampered with. It was just open. I leaned slightly, angling myself so I could see inside without fully stepping closer. At first, it looked empty. Just another room similar in size to the one I was staying in. Bare walls, minimal furniture. Nothing that immediately stood out. But something about it felt wrong. Not in a clear, obvious way. Just a subtle sense that the space had been disturbed recently, like someone had been in there. I couldn't see anything moving. No shadows shifting. No shapes in the corners. And yet, the longer I looked, the more that feeling settled in. I didn't step inside. I didn't even reach for the door. I just stood there for a few seconds longer, letting that quiet, uneasy certainty sink in. Then I turned around. I didn't pack properly. I didn't check the rest of the house. I just went back into the bedroom, grabbed what I could carry, and headed straight for the front door. My movements were faster now, less controlled. The calm I'd tried to hold on to earlier was gone, replaced by something sharper. Not panic, but close. I stepped outside into the night air and didn't stop walking until I reached my car. Only then did I look back. The house stood exactly the same. No lights turning on, No movement behind the windows. Just still, like nothing had changed. I got in the car and left. I didn't go far. Just far enough that the house disappeared from view. Then I pulled over and sat there for a few minutes, trying to slow my breathing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Eventually, I found another place to stay. Somewhere closer to the main road, somewhere with other people around. I didn't go back. The next day, I checked my messages again. Still nothing from the host. No replies, no acknowledgement that I had even been there. I sent one more message, asking about the door. No response. A few days later, out of curiosity, I looked up the listing again. It wasn't there. The page had been removed. No photos, no reviews, nothing. Like it had never existed. I tried to tell myself it was just coincidence. That maybe the host took it down, or there was some issue with the platform. But there was one detail I couldn't explain. When I thought back to that moment in the hallway, to the brief glimpse I got inside the room, I realized something I hadn't fully registered at the time. There had been a chair in the center of the room, positioned at an angle, facing the door. And for some reason, that was the part that stayed with me the longest. Transition. I started noticing things more. After that night, something changed in the way I paid attention to things. Not in an obvious way. I didn't suddenly become paranoid or start expecting something to happen every time I walked into a room, but there was this quiet shift in how I noticed details. Small ones. The kind most people would ignore. Like how a place feels when you first step into it. Not just what it looks like, but whether something about it doesn't quite sit right. Or the way silence can feel different depending on where you are. Sometimes it's peaceful, other times it feels wrong, like it's missing something it should have. I started catching myself hesitating more, pausing before opening a door, listening a little longer than necessary when something didn't sound quite normal. Most of the time, there was nothing there. Just my mind filling in blanks, trying to make sense of things that didn't need explaining. But every now and then, I'd get that same feeling again. That quiet sense that something was slightly off. And the thing is, once you notice it, you can't really ignore it anymore. Which is why the last time it happened, I knew right away. Story 3 set up a normal evening walk. By then, I had a habit of going for walks at night. It wasn't anything deliberate at first, just something I started doing when I couldn't sleep. Instead of lying there staring at the ceiling, I'd put on a jacket, step outside, and walk for a while until my mind settled down. It usually worked. There's something about quiet streets at night that feels steady, predictable. The same houses, the same sidewalks, everything in its place. Even when no one's around, it doesn't feel empty, just calm. I stuck to the same route most nights. A loop through a residential area not far from where I lived. It wasn't particularly busy during the day, and at night it got even quieter. A few porch lights left on, the occasional car parked along the curb, but not much else. I like that. It made it easier to think or not think, depending on what I needed. There was one stretch of the route that always stood out a little. Not because anything had ever happened there, just because it felt more still than the rest. The houses were spaced a bit farther apart, the streetlights dimmer, the shadows deeper along the sidewalks. And right in the middle of that stretch, there was a house that had been for sale for a while. I'd noticed it the first time I walked past. A simple place, 2 stories, pale exterior, nothing distinctive about it. The kind of house you wouldn't look at twice during the day, but at night it felt different. There were no lights on. Not outside, not inside. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn just enough to block most of the view. A for sale sign stood in the yard, slightly angled, like it had been there longer than it should have. I remember checking it a couple of times over the weeks. Not on purpose. Just something my eyes would land on as I passed by. Nothing ever changed. No cars in the driveway. No movement inside. No signs that anyone had been there recently. It felt unoccupied. Which is why, the night it happened, I didn't think much of it at first. I was halfway through my usual walk, moving at a steady pace, my hands in my pockets. The air was cooler than usual, but not uncomfortable. The kind of night where everything feels quiet in a normal way. I turned onto that stretch of road and kept walking, The house came into view like it always did. Same position, same stillness. For a few seconds, I didn't even look directly at it, just kept my eyes forward, letting it sit in the edge of my vision. But then something made me slow down slightly, not stop, just hesitate. It wasn't a sound. There was no movement. Nothing obvious that I could point to. Just a feeling. Subtle, but distinct, like I was being watched. I told myself it was nothing. That it was just the same thing I'd been noticing more lately. That heightened awareness, picking up on things that weren't really there. Still, I found myself glancing toward the house as I passed. The windows were dark, just like before. The curtains hung in the same position. The sign in the yard hadn't moved. Everything looked exactly the same. And yet, as I kept walking, that feeling didn't go away. It stayed with me, quiet, persistent, like something had noticed me, even if I hadn't seen it yet. Someone was inside. I kept walking. At first, I tried to ignore it, that feeling, the sense that something was off. I had it before, and most of the time, it didn't lead to anything. Just my mind picking up on small details and turning them into something more than they were. So I stayed on my usual pace, eyes forward, letting the house fall behind me. But I didn't get far. Something made me look back. I don't know exactly why. There wasn't a sound, no sudden movement that caught my attention, just a quiet pull, like my focus shifted on its own. I slowed down, turning my head slightly as I walked. The house was still there, exactly where it had been. Dark. Still. For a second, I thought that was it, that I'd just been imagining things. Then I saw it. A faint movement behind one of the windows. So subtle that I almost missed it. I stopped walking. The shape was hard to make out at first. The glass reflected a bit of the street light, and the curtains were drawn unevenly, leaving only a narrow view inside. But something had definitely shifted. I took a step back without really thinking about it, angling myself to get a clearer view. That's when the shape settled. And I realized it wasn't just a shape, it was a person. Standing just behind the window, completely still. I felt my chest tighten slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the sudden awareness that I wasn't alone out there. My first thought was simple. Someone must have come to look at the house. Maybe a potential buyer, maybe an agent doing a late inspection. It wasn't impossible. People do things at odd hours all the time. That made sense. It should have been enough. But something about it didn't sit right. I stood there for a few seconds watching. The figure didn't move, not even slightly. No shifting of weight, no adjustment, nothing that suggested a normal person standing in place. Just stillness. I tried to focus on the details, but the lighting made it difficult. All I could really make out was the outline. The height, the general shape of a person facing outward, facing toward the street, toward me. I told myself it was probably just the reflection. Maybe what I was seeing wasn't inside the house at all, but a distorted image of something behind me. A trick of the light, the angle of the glass, anything like that. I turned my head slightly, glancing around the street to check. There was nothing behind me that matched the shape. No one walking, no parked car in a position that could create that kind of reflection. When I looked back at the window, the figure was still there. Exactly where it had been, watching. That was the part that started to bother me. It didn't feel like someone who had just noticed me. It felt like someone who had already been looking. I became aware of how long I'd been standing there, how still I was. And for a brief moment, I considered calling out. Just something simple. Hello? Or, is someone there? Enough to confirm that it was a normal situation. That there was a person inside doing something ordinary, and I was just overthinking it. The words formed in my mind, but I didn't say them. Something stopped me. I can't really explain why. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like hesitation. Like I didn't actually want a response. Because if there was someone in there, if they answered, that would make it real in a way I wasn't ready to deal with. So instead, I took a slow step backward, then another. The figure didn't move, didn't react, didn't acknowledge me at all. That felt worse than if they had. I turned away, telling myself it didn't matter, that I had no reason to stand there staring into someone else's house, even if it was supposed to be empty. I started walking again, At first, my pace was normal, then gradually it picked up. Not enough to draw attention, just enough that I felt like I was putting distance between myself and the house. But even as I moved away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still there, still in the same position, still watching. I resisted the urge to look back. For a few steps, I managed it. Then I gave in. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the house again. The window was still visible from where I was, and the figure had moved, same position, same stillness, still facing outward, still watching. I looked away quickly this time and kept walking. Not running, not rushing, just moving forward with a steady pace, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, that there were explanations for it, that I didn't need to understand what I had just seen. But deep down, that same quiet feeling was building again, the one I'd felt before. That something about the situation didn't make sense, and that whatever I had seen in that window wasn't behaving like it should have been. It followed me without moving. I kept walking. At first, I told myself not to look back again. There was no reason to. I had already seen enough to convince myself that something wasn't right, but not enough to prove what it actually was. Looking again wouldn't change that. It would only make it harder to ignore. So I focused on the path ahead. The sidewalk stretched out in front of me, empty and quiet. The houses on either side were dark, most of them with curtains drawn, lights off, nothing unusual. Everything felt normal, except for the feeling that hadn't gone away. If anything, it was stronger now. That quiet awareness of being watched, like something behind me hadn't lost interest just because I had decided to leave. I kept my pace steady, trying not to let it show. But after a few seconds, I couldn't help it. I looked back again. This time, it took me a moment to find the house. I had put some distance between myself and it, and the angle was different now. The street curved slightly, changing the way everything lined up. But when I found it, something was wrong. The window I had been looking at before was still there, still dark, still empty. The figure wasn't in it anymore. For a second, I felt a brief, almost immediate sense of relief. Like maybe I had imagined it after all. Like maybe there had never been anyone there to begin with. Then my eyes shifted to another window on the same house a little further to the side. And there it was. The same shape. The same stillness. Standing behind the glass. Facing outward. Facing me. I stopped walking. Not completely this time, but enough that my pace broke, my body reacting before my mind caught up. That didn't make sense. There was no way it could have moved that quickly without me seeing it. I had only looked away for a few seconds. There hadn't been enough time. And even if there had been, there was no visible movement, no transition. Just a change in position, like it had always been there. I stared at it for a moment, longer than I should have, trying to find something that explained it, a reflection maybe. A trick of the light. Something that could account for what I was seeing without forcing me to accept it as real. But the more I looked, the worse it felt. Because it wasn't just the position that was the same. It was everything. The posture, the angle. The complete lack of movement. It was like the figure hadn't moved at all. Like it had simply appeared somewhere else. I turned away. This time I didn't slow down. My pace picked up without me thinking about it. Each step a little faster than the last. Not running, not yet, but no longer casual. I didn't look back again. I didn't want to. Because I already knew what I would see. Or worse, what I wouldn't. The street ahead felt longer now. The distance between me and the next turn stretched out in a way that made it harder to relax. Every shadow felt deeper. Every dark window more noticeable. And that feeling, it didn't fade. If anything, it followed me. Not physically. Not in a way I could point to. Just a steady, unshakable sense that whatever had been in that house was still aware of me, still watching, even as I moved further away. I turned the corner at the end of the street, finally putting the house out of view. Only then did I let myself breathe a little easier. But even then, I didn't stop. I kept walking until I reached a more familiar part of the neighborhood. Somewhere with more light, more signs of people being nearby. Only then did the feeling start to loosen its grip. Eventually, I made it home. I didn't go back out that night. The next day, I tried to make sense of it. I told myself it had to be something simple. A person inside the house, someone checking it late at night, moving from room to room. The lack of movement, the silence, it could all be explained if I looked at it the right way. So I went back during the day, not right away. I waited until the afternoon when everything felt normal again. When I reached the house, it looked exactly the same. The sign was still there. The curtains hadn't moved. The windows were just as dark, even in daylight. I walked past it slowly, this time without stopping. But I looked closer. There were no signs of anyone being there. No car in the driveway. No footprints leading up to the door. No indication that the house had been opened or used recently. It didn't just look empty. It felt empty. Completely. Like it had been that way for a long time. I didn't go back again after that. I changed my route, found a different street to walk on at night. And even now, I avoid that area completely. Not because I'm afraid of seeing it again, but because I never figured out what it was. Whether there was actually someone inside that house, or if whatever I saw was just watching from somewhere else. You don't always see the danger. When I think back on all of it now, the strange part isn't what happened. It's what didn't. Nothing ever crossed a clear line. There was no moment where something fully revealed itself. No point where I could say with certainty that I was in danger. Each situation ended before it got that far, before anything could be confirmed. And maybe that's what makes it harder to forget, because it leaves too much space, too many unanswered questions. The passenger who never spoke, who was there 1 second and gone the next. The house where something felt wrong long before I saw the door open. The figure behind the window that moved without being seen. In every case, there was a moment where I could have done something different. Looked a little longer, asked a question, stepped closer instead of walking away. But I didn't, and I still don't know if that was the right decision. I've had time to think about it since then. To go over each detail, trying to find a version of events that makes sense. Something logical. Something I can explain without leaving gaps. But the more I tried, the more it comes back to the same feeling that something was there. Not obvious, not aggressive. Just present, waiting, maybe, or watching. And the truth is, I don't think you always get a clear warning when something isn't right. Sometimes it's just a small shift in the way a place feels. A moment of silence that lasts a little too long. A detail that doesn't quite line up. Easy to ignore. Easy to dismiss. Until later, when you realize how close you might have been to something you didn't understand. So now, when I notice that feeling again, I don't brush it off as quickly. Because whatever it is, you don't always see the danger. Sometimes you just feel it.